Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third week of Obsidian October. It's very good to have you here with me again. The biggest news this week is, of course, the release of Obsidian 1.0. And one of the major changes, as I'm sure you all know, is the updated look and feel. It looks absolutely stunning. Of course, joining me later this in the stream is Kipano from the Obsidian team, who's going to be, talking about theme development. And he's been instrumental, I should say, in the development of the new look and feel. So stick with me. It's going to be great. Before that, I'm going to continue on this tutorial series that we've got going on here. We've so far been, getting you set up with plugin development. We've seen how you can accept user input through ribbon actions and commands. And today we're going to be looking at settings. And so what do I mean by settings here? Well, let's say that you have a plugin that you want to let the users be able to change things or customize things and have those changes stick with you after you restart Obsidian, so they pop up again. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started. So I left you last time with this plugin that I'm building for Halloween called the Spooky plugin. It's very spooky. And what you can do right now is that we have a command here called peek into the dark. We also have a ribbon action up here that does the same thing, but showing the differences between both ribbon actions and commands. But so this right now, the scary part here, we're scaring the user, saying boo, right? Very scary. But this is hard coded right now. What if the user wants to be scared in a different way, right? Maybe something else is more scarier to them. So we want to be able to change that and let the user be able to change that specifically. So very, very cool. So the first thing we will do is to configure, just look at how we can load and save settings. And then we'll be adding a settings tab into the settings in Obsidian. So what we're going to be doing is that we'll basically add our own settings page here under the Obsidian settings. So let's dive into it. So the first thing that we want to be doing is to define what can we actually configure. And we do that let's see if we add another interface here. Let's call it the Spooky plugin settings, right? So here we want to define what kind of properties we want the user to be able to change in the settings. So let's call that the spooky text, right? That's going to be a string. So basically the text we want them to be able to change, right? And the next thing we probably want to do, not always, but I'm going to do it in, this time around, is to provide default values, right? Let's say that it's the first time they are opening this plugin and they haven't yet configured anything. So we want it to still be, showing something and not just crashing. So we will create a default setting, basically. So we're going to do that by creating a default settings object. And that will essentially be the same thing, but I'm going to use a word called partial here. Partial essentially means that all the properties of this type that I'm defining here will be optional. So when I'm doing that here, I can now have my spooky text here. And I'm going to set it to be the boo string as default. Okay. So again, when I save here, I can see that the Spooky plugin has been reloaded. So I'm doing this with the hot reload plugin that we covered in a previous video. So in case you're seeing the pop-ups coming up here, that's what it is. So now we have a definition of what we want to change, and we have the default value for it. But it's not being used anywhere. Well, the first thing we want to do is to add it to our plugin class. So let's add it here. So this is so that we can access it from anywhere in the plugin, be it a command, a ribbon action, whatever you may have. So we're going to add it as a member variable here. And the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to load the settings and save settings. And turns out that Obsidian has a API for this. So there's going to be two interesting functions that we're going to be looking at. So if you hit this dot load data, this is the function that actually brings data from file into your plugin, into runtime. And this is going to automatically go to a file called data.json inside your plugin directory. And so this is going to give us an object, essentially. And we can do something like, I don't know, we can do this settings load data. In this case, it's not actually the correct type. So what I like to do, I actually like to extract this to its own function, and we're going to make that async because this is I/O operations that we're doing. We're reading from the file system. So I'm just going to check. Yes. So let's call this load settings. And let's move this into load settings here. And in this case, we're going to do an await and wait for the data to become available. And then we're assigning it to our settings variable here. So this is great. But right now, we're not really using our default values. So where do we put this? Right. So the way I've actually messed up the first time I did this because I was kind of assigning my default settings right to my my settings object, which meant that I was actually it was keeping a reference to it, and I was updating it when I changed my settings. So when I changed my settings, I also updated the default settings, which is not what you want to do. So you can avoid that by using this object assign function. What that takes is it takes a series of arguments, and it's going to take the first argument in the list, which is in this case an empty object, and then it's going to add all the properties in the subsequent arguments to that object. Okay, so it's essentially like we're cloning the objects after the first one. So we can actually add multiple one of these. So if I do something like this, this is going to take the first empty object here. It's going to assign all the properties from our default settings, and then it's going to apply all the stuff that we have in data.json. Of course, if we don't have any data in data.json, all we're going to get is the default settings. So I think that's a pretty good start. Right now, we don't have anything, loaded. We haven't saved anything yet. So hopefully, if we start using this, we'll see our default settings. So what if I save this and, the next thing, we probably want to be using this variable that we're loading, right? So we're just setting settings here, but we're not actually using it. And the way we can do that is just by going to where we want to use it, and we can access our property like this. Okay, so we're just setting our spooky text from our settings and using that in the notice, right? Let's see if that works. Huh. So nothing is happening when I click the peek into the dark. So there's actually not any call to load settings here. So the next thing that you want to do is to actually call the load settings method here when the plugin loads. So when we load the plugin, we want to also load the data. So let's do that. We want to use a wait here, and so that we wait until the data has been read before we continue on. And then we're going to call this load settings method. There we go. So now, if we're lucky, this is live demo. So hopefully this will work when I click this. There we have it. So right now it's using, actually not I did a run through it before this. So this is why the settings is actually already there. But we can go and soon we will actually update that. So I can actually, no, never mind. We'll fix that later. So right now we're actually loading data that's already there actually into runtime. And we're doing this through this load settings call. Awesome. So now we actually want to change this because right now we can't really. The only way to change this is to actually go to the data.json file and change and update that, right? So we want to have some way of being able to change that inside the UI. And so Obsidian actually provides a pretty good tool for doing just that, which is called Settings tab. So that's the next thing that we will do. To do that, we need to create a new file. Well, we don't have to, but I like keeping things separate. So let's call that settings. There we go. And so right now we don't really have anything, but we will be creating a class. Let's call that spooky settings tab, something like that. So this is going to hold our settings tab. But in order for us to be able to hook this into Obsidian, we need to extend this with or from the plugin setting tab inside Obsidian. So you see that it automatically imported it for me. If you're using VS Code or any other, usually that happens by itself, but sometimes you have to manually import it. So let's close this so we can see a little bit more. There we go. So now you can see that there's a little red squiggly line under my class name. And that's because I need to implement a certain number of methods here. And the only one really is the display one. The display method is what actually is going to draw or where we can define the look or what fields we want to show or display. So that's a good start. The next thing that we want to do is to actually, bring in the plugin into the setting tab, because right now we don't have any way of accessing our settings. So we need an reference to our plugin or our settings variable, really. So we can do that by just passing it through a constructor. Turns out the plugin setting tab actually wants the plugin and the app either way. So we can take them and then pass them onto the plugin setting tab object. But since we actually want to be using the settings here, I'm going to actually store this plugin inside my class as well. And I'm going to store it like that, and then I'm going to assign it. Something like that. So this means that now inside my display function here, I can actually access my plugin, and in turn, I can access my settings. So this is going to be very useful once we start, in order for the user to change anything, we need to be able to update our settings and load them, of course. So what's the next step? So what we want to do now is essentially, we need to draw something. We need to start adding HTML elements. Where do we do that? So the first thing that you want to look at is, so on this object, the plugin setting tab actually gives you an HTML element that you can attach things to. It's called a container EL. I actually like to write it something like this, where I just bring out the container element from the plugin settings tab. And from here, I can start adding elements to it. So container L is of type HTML element. And all HTML elements have these methods on them that lets you create elements within them. So the container EL element is going to be the container that contains our settings, essentially. So we will start populating and adding things to it. So let's first add a heading, H1 heading with some text. So spooky settings. When I save that, hopefully we will see something. Yes. So what we're missing right now is that we've created this setting tab, but we're not actually using it. Our plugin does not know about it yet. So in here, there's no reference to our setting tab. So the way we register a settings tab is just like we did with the ribbon actions and add commands. We register them through this, I believe it's a register. Let's see. Is it? No, it's add. So add settings tab. So here now we can add an instance to our setting tab, and it's gonna look something like this. So we said we had spooky setting tab, something like that. And now we can just pass our app from here and our plugin. There we go. And now you see that it's been reloaded because now we actually changed something to that actually the final output. So now if we go and look at settings, we will actually see that there's a new section down here called spooky. And right now it's not showing much, but we can see the heading that we created. So feel free to add things. You can add any HTML elements here. So you can just go nuts here. If I add another H2 here, we can look and we have another one there. Very cool. So this is a good start, but I'm just holding off on the inevitable. At some point, we're going to want to display this inside our editor, and I can of course do something like this where I can go to the plugin, just like I showed before. I can access the settings, and here's the spooky text. Right? I can do that, and it will show up here. But I can't change any of this, and that's probably what you want to do in here in the settings. So that's kind of the next thing that we want to do is we want to somehow have like a input field or a text field, some sort. And this is where the Obsidian API actually helps a lot. So there is a API class here called setting. So this is what we want to use. And it takes a single element, and that's the HTML element that you want to attach, you want to add the settings to. So in our case, it's going to be the container EL. And to that, we can now add certain controls to this this setting that we created. We can also look at some other settings we can set, which is more, the actual setting itself. So let's say we set the name for the setting here, and it's going to be the spooky text. We might want to give a description of, what is this for? Make it real scary, something like that. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so now we have the text here, the name of the setting, and we got some nice description there, but we don't actually have any control. So we're gonna be adding, as you can see from the autocomplete here, there's a bunch of stuff we can add here. We can add color pickers, drop downs, sliders, all sorts of stuff. In this case, I'm gonna change the text. So I'm gonna be adding a text component here. This actually takes a callback. So the argument to that callback is the item that we want to configure. So it's a text component that we want to configure. And if we check what's on there, we can see that just like before, we have a few options that we can change here. Let's see here. So let's say that we want to set the value of this. And I'm going to be using the settings spooky text here. Okay. So hopefully now we will have a text object. There you go. A text element with the settings text in it. Very cool. But we're just now we're reading the settings. We're looking at it, but we can't actually change it. So that's our next step. We want to change. Let's see. So I see a question here that I can answer right away. Let's see. So is there a way to use the settings API inside a modal? Yes. So the only thing this is doing is that it populates the HTML element that you give it. So you can use it anywhere where you have an HTML element that you can attach it to. So it's just creating the divs and all the text inputs and so on. So feel free to use it whenever you have an HTML element somewhere. Good question. Okay, so let's get going with saving. And for that, let's see if we can add, we want to have like an on change. So when we actually change something here, we want to take the value and we want to do something with that, right? And in this case, let's just create something where we can see the value. And hopefully now if I change this, yeah, you can see that I'm changing the value here. But so I want to actually write this back to the file system. I want to persist this now. And right now there's no real way to do that. So for that, let's go back to our main class here. And just like I have a load settings, let's create a save settings as well, just to be a little symmetric here. Symmetric. So let's say save settings. Okay. So now when we have save settings there, we can access it just like we did the load settings. So we can go to plugin here. We can actually call the settings object, and we can set the value here. And then we can call this plugin save settings. Okay, so we're updating the spooky text in the settings, and then we're persisting that to our file system. But okay, so I know you're very eager to see what's in here, and lo and behold, it's actually very similar to load data. It's called save data. And what does that take? It takes an object, believe it or not, which is going to be our settings object. That's it. So now I should be able to update this to something like boo then. And should be already saved here. As soon as I change this, it should be saved. So let's prove that this is actually working by disabling the plugin. So now the all plugin state is gone. Hopefully now, when we enable this, we again see the settings pop up here, and we have the persisted value. So this is actually now stored to disk, which is really helpful. And of course, in my plugins, I'm also using this data.json to store state that is not necessarily customizable for the user, but just state that I want to be persisted throughout the journey. So kind of layout states, any settings that the user is doing in the actual plugin, not just the settings. I tend to save that as well. So yeah, let's actually look at how this data.json looks like. I think I have one here. So this is my vault opened inside Visual Studio Code. So now we can go to the .obsidian plugins, and we can see my Obsidian Spooky plugin here. You can see all the files that I have here, but you can also see this data.json file. And this is just a JSON object with the settings object that I defined inside my plugin. Very cool. That's everything I have to show you when it comes to settings today. You can, of course, experiment yourself with, try adding multiple settings here. So I added a text setting here, but feel free to start adding other types of settings as well, and different components to them that, make sense for what you're trying to build. And again, feel free to use these new settings wherever you have a HTML element, be it in the modal or anywhere you can fit it in a view, a custom view, which we will be talking about, I believe, next time. So stick with us until then. I will take a small break, and after that, we will be back to talk about theme development with Kepano from the Obsidian team. So stick with me. I'll see you in a little bit.